It's 1993. The Italian Grand Prix gets underway. The Williams cars are running away up front, and practically speaking, the race is already over. Although, for a handful of people, they took this a little bit too literally. 5 drivers were out of the race before they had a chance to have food thrown at them by the ever rambunctious Tifosi. One of these drivers was a local, an Italian by the name of Marco Apicella, a stand-in driver for the Jordan team who, at this juncture, was celebrating their second year in Formula 1 by swapping out Italian drivers at every round that they could. For Apicella, this race was a dream in which was 28 years in the making, and which happened after almost 10 years of racing cars. But not even before he got to turn 1, that dream was over. His Formula 1 career was over, and just to rub salt into the wounds, at 800 meters, Apicella held the unfortunate record of the shortest Formula 1 career of all time. Except for one tiny, little, and quite frankly, trivial thing. It wasn't actually the shortest Formula 1 career of all time, despite many outlets saying it was. So what gives? What was it, actually? Well, strap yourselves in and hold on to something, because we're going way back. Ah, crap, too far. Here we go. 1953. Jesus, this was a year. Tenzing Norgay and Sir Edmund Hillary were the first people to climb Everest. Laos became independent from France, which is interesting. Ike was sworn in, Lizzie was coronated, oh yeah, and Stalin died. What a time to be alive. Well, maybe not for him. Formula 1 in this time was weird. As if you didn't know that already. It may have only been around for a few years, but it had all the teething troubles of a high school group project or an F1 YouTube video. This year marked the 4th iteration of the World Championship, and the beginning of August would see Germany host the 7th round of that championship. Where in Germany was it held? Well, where else? Nestled in the Eifel mountain range sits the Nürburgring. It boasts 11 million corners and one of the toughest challenges in all of motor racing. A track Sir Jackie Stewart dubbed the Green Hell. Any mistake on this track will earn you a one-way ticket to the afterlife. So it was most certainly not a track for the faint of heart. You needed to be braver than brave to tackle this Leviathan. Either that or be Italian. And that's not really me being a clown, as for the first few years of Formula 1, the Italians virtually dominated the sport. Maserati, Alfa Romeo, and Ferrari had the best cars. They were the teams of the time, and 3 out of the first 4 championships were won by Italian drivers. The first by Nino Farina, and the other 2 by the fastest warthog of all time, Alberto Ascari. Truly great drivers. But of course, they did have to contend with Juan Manuel Fangio of Argentina, one of, if not the greatest driver of all time. You also had the likes of Mike Hawthorne, Sir Sterling Moss, and a handful of other solid drivers scattered throughout the field. But in these times, it wasn't uncommon for gentlemen drivers to rock up to a weekend with a car powered by hopes, dreams, and vibes. This weekend, about a dozen or so Germans decided to do just that, and one of them was this guy. His name was Ernst Loof. If you haven't heard of Ernst Loof before, that's okay, cause I haven't either. Until I made that video back in the day. Luffy here had never driven in Formula 1 before, but this weekend, that would all change. This would be his Formula 1 debut, driving in a car that he designed, built under a company that he founded. This was the first German Formula 1 car ever made, and it was called the Meteor. Naming your car after a metallic body that throws itself into the ground in a ball of flame is a little uncanny, and it was about to be put through its paces on a track that has twice as many gravestones as it does corners. Still, could be worse. It rained most of the week leading up to the race, but on the final day of qualifying, it dried up enough to allow the drivers to set representative times. Fangio threw his car around the behemoth in 10 minutes and 3 seconds. That was over a second faster than the previous year's record set by Ascari, whose feelings were hurt by this and decided, fine, I'll show you a lap time. He went around in 9 minutes and 59 seconds to take pole position. That was a 3.9 second gap to second place. It sounds ludicrous nowadays, and it gives the impression that these old farmers were not so serious about motorsport. But back then, with everything that was going on, it wasn't that preposterous. Sure, the car did make a difference, but how brave or borderline suicidal the driver was made even more of a difference. Don't let their fluid physiques fool you. There was some serious pace out there. So, where was Ernst Loof in all of this? Well, he wasn't 3.9 seconds behind Ascari. He wasn't even 3.9 seconds behind Fangio. He was a little further behind. set a time of 12 minutes and 16 seconds. He was well over 2 minutes behind Ascari's pole position time, and what's worse was that he missed a personal goal that he had set of setting a time below the 12-minute bracket. Yes, this was a time of gentleman drivers in Formula 1. But as we know, a paid driver in 2023 that's 3/10 off of a world champion? Well, that's obviously inescapably worse. And Luff was no Fangio, he was no Ascari, and he was 45 years old in the midst of bankruptcy. This was to be his last race, although it was not a nice time for him to find out that he was slower than a dog on a rug. But at least now, he could say that he had taken part in a Formula 1 Grand Prix weekend. Because there was no 107% rule back then, Luff would line up on the grid on Sunday and get his maiden Grand Prix start, even if for only one race. He would be starting from 31st on the grid, on the back row, but there would be 18 laps for him to improve on his position. 18 laps to put the demons of qualifying behind him. 18 laps to go out on a high. The green flag dropped, the field accelerated away. But at the back of the grid, Luff's fuel pump had failed. This starved his engine of petrol and threw him and his car out of the race. Crucially, he did start that race under his own power, so technically he was classified as a starter, and thus any mileage he got in the race did count toward his F1 career stats. But while the aforementioned Marco Apicello only got a mere 800 yards in his F1 career, Luff got a little bit less than that. His F1 career was over after only 6.5 feet. His career covered less distance than an entire LeBron James. Ernst Luff? More like Ernst Oof. After this dismal failure, he packed up his kit and left the circuit, never again to compete in a motor race, and the company that he had founded had gone into bankruptcy and was eventually absorbed by BMW. I guess this is where I'm supposed to produce some kind of silver lining, but it's a little hard to find one. I mean, this was it. I suppose Luff did play a role in reviving Germany's motor racing scene after it was brought to its knees after the war. And so when Mercedes won the world championship just 2 years later, there must have been something to take from that? Maybe?